We would also like to thank the panelists for taking the time to participate in this event and speak to us about their experience in consulting. Thank you to the Villanova Consulting Group for co-sponsoring this year's conference and to Chi Chioki for moderating the panel tonight.
Next, we would like to give a special thank you to this year's sponsor, EY, and specifically Jenny O'Donnell from EY, Villanova's campus recruiter. Thank you all for making tonight possible. Before we introduce our keynote and panelist speakers, we would like to recognize two EY campus coordinating partners who are Villanova alumni, Ryan Oswald and Lisette Snedeker.
Now it is time to introduce our panelists and keynote speaker.
First, we have Maciel Valadares. She graduated from Villanova in May of 2020 with a business analytics, international business, and marketing major, and a peace and justice studies minor. She is from Honduras and will be assuming a full-time position this November as a consultant for McKinsey Panama.
Next, we have Allison Johnson. Allison graduated from Villanova last year with a BBA in economics, as well as minors in both business analytics and Spanish. As a management consulting associate in financial services of PricewaterhouseCoopers Advisory, she's focused on client engagements regarding operation transformation.
Next is Mally Fogarty. Mally graduated cum laude from Villanova in May of 2017 with a Bachelor of Business Administration in Finance and International Business. She has a well-rounded background in financial services and is currently a senior consultant in the data and analytics consulting of Ernst & Young.
Next, we have Amina Fawad. She graduated in 2015 from the Villanova School of Business. She was a previous woman in business president and has since been working for Deloitte Consulting to recruit talent, solve key tech problems, and to focus in supply chain transformations.
Next, we have Catherine Anderson. Catherine has a Bachelor's of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Villanova. She worked in the operations practice at McKinsey to deliver capital portfolios around the world.
And finally, we want to introduce our keynote speaker, Amy Braccio, a partner and global business consulting leader at EY. She has more than 20 years of experience helping large companies manage risk and specializes in risk management and enterprise transformation. Her role at EY includes helping clients achieve their strategic goals and maintain stakeholder trust. Amy has received numerous accolades for her work, including being one of the winners of Profile and Diversity Journal's 2017 Women Worth Watching and a recipient of Consulting Magazine's Global Leaders in Consulting Award in 2019. She's also involved with numerous organizations such as C200 that are devoted to empowering and advancing women in business.
Now that we have introduced our keynote and panelists, everyone please be sure to keep your microphone muted and turn your attention to Amy Braccio. Following her keynote speech, there will be a Q&A portion where you can ask questions either using the raise your hand feature or write your question in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, first of all. I'm so excited to be speaking to all of you. And I'm so excited to see how we've adapted, right? I think in the past we relied on being in person for things like this. And now, we're being creative and we're still able to do it, but in a different way. So I thought what I would do is talk about three things. First, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. You heard my bio, but maybe fill in, a little bit from when I graduated to where I am today. And then second, I wanted to talk about resilience. And I thought I'd talk about resilience both in the context of the business world and then also as we think about it personally. And then last, I'll share my thoughts on the future of consulting and a career in consulting. And I love the Q&A portion. So I'm hoping that we have those first brave people willing to ask a question so that we get it going when we get to that point. So I'll start a bit about my background. So I started with EY as an intern and have spent my entire career at the firm. And so I know that probably feels crazy. And when I was in your shoes, I don't think I ever dreamed that this is where my path would take me, but it's been an absolutely amazing career. So I interned, I went back and I got my master's in accountancy and I am a CPA, and then I came back to the firm. I've always though been focused on the consulting side of things, even when that's not what we called it. So, for the majority of my career, I worked with large banks all around consumer protection. So, if you think about things like access to credit, non discrimination in lending, the foreclosure issues after the credit crisis, things like that, those are the topics that I focus on helping the biggest banks in the country to tackle. I then got asked to take on a leadership role, first in risk management, and now I have responsibility for business consulting globally. And so, what that means to EY is a lot of what I heard in the introductions for the other panelists. So, I have responsibility for the support we provide to clients around finance consulting, supply chain consulting, business transformation, and all dimensions of risk. And that's about 39,000 people around the world. So it's just an amazing opportunity. While all of that has been happening, I have a life outside of work as well, which is exciting. And I married my college boyfriend. You'll kind of see a theme on consistency. So he was my boyfriend when I was an intern. And now we are happy to say that even after my travel has slowed down, we're happily married. We've got two daughters. One that I'm thinking about as I look at all of your faces, because she's a student at NYU, she's a sophomore. And then my younger daughter is a high school senior. So she's also experiencing life in a different way, doing her senior year online. But the plus side for her is she is really into horses. So we have three horses that live in a barn about 10 minutes from our house. And so I think she's loving the fact that she gets to be at the barn and do her classes when she wants to do her classes. So that's a little bit about me and about my journey. And the reason why I wanted to talk about resilience is that I think it is really important in how businesses are reflecting on their experience through this, unprecedented time and how they look forward when they think about transforming. But then I think we all as individuals need to think about how we're resilient as well. So, from a business standpoint, I mean, I think we all reflect on the fact that the world almost stopped overnight, and it was a rolling process. So, sometimes people talk about in business that black swan can show up. This I've heard described as the white rhino running at you, right? We saw what happened in Asia, rolled into Italy, and then, slowly has made its way around the world. And then there was the first wave, second wave, and now, depending on how you're counting, maybe even the third wave. And so businesses have taken a step back and reflected on how did we manage through this? And as we look forward and we anticipate the unthinkable could happen, are we prepared for it and are we going to thrive? So, some of the things that businesses have been thinking about when they think about resilience is risk management. Did their risk management processes actually contemplate something like a pandemic? And I'll tell you, very few did. And of those that did, they really only thought about the impact within their four walls. They didn't think about what if my supplier can no longer get something to me, or what if, the people I rely on to sell my products go out of business or can't open their doors. They also thought about how much they relied on third parties. And for those third parties, what would they need to do to make sure that those third parties could stay in business? They thought about everything from where they get their supplies to how they get it to market to make sure that they weren't reliant too much on any individual organization outside. And then importantly, they thought about how they were able to enable their people to work in a very, very different way. And it also caused a lot of organizations to take a step back and reflect on how far were they actually in their digital transformation journey. Because those that were already interacting with their employees, through digital means, those that were already ready to get teams up and running, those that already had mobile ways of communicating with their customers, you'll see that they're much further along than those where they had to get all that stood up overnight. So I share that in thinking about what it means to be a consultant, because those are the types of challenges that we're helping our clients with today. All the way from refreshing their risk management to looking at how they interact with their clientele to thinking about the new ways of working to looking at the culture of the organization. And so it's a career in which you get to have access to all of those different topics and help clients transform. I think, though, that it's also really important to reflect on personal resilience. And this is something that when I have conversations with boards of directors, one of the things that they're most worried about is the health and well-being and wellness of their employees. And, it's easy to think about that in the way of how are we going to make sure that we disinfect everything, how, mask wearing policies and all of that. That's all vitally important, especially for those that need to work within a given physical location. But it's also the impact on just general wellness and mental health, and needing to think through that individual resilience and how you enable your employees to face times in which life has turned around and you may have your kids sitting at the desk next to you trying to juggle between work and making sure that your children are able to receive their education. And so I think it's important, I thought I'd share a little bit about how I'm thinking about personal resilience. So one of the things that you would have heard me talk about prior to this time period was all of my amazing travel, and my travel has been amazing. And then it shut down like overnight. And part of what I had to reflect on is that this is a very relationship heavy business when you're in consulting. It's relationships with your clients, it's relationships with your team members, it's that in-person coaching and mentoring. And I get a lot of energy from things like that. And so I needed to think about how do I get the same level of energy that I bring to my work when I can't have access to some of those normal energy giving activities that I've relied upon throughout my whole career. And so I've looked for different opportunities and different ways to build relationships. So you heard in my bio that I'm a member of C200, which is an organization, one of many that are fantastic, focused on advancing women. Well, I joined that because I thought, how am I going to meet new people when I'm not traveling, right? And so I looked for different organizations that might give me access to that. The other thing our family has been very focused on is we are doubling down on wellness. And so we compete on our Apple Watches. I joined a yoga studio that offers online yoga classes, meditation before bed. My older daughter got me into that. And so just looking at ways as a family that we can think differently about wellness. And I think one of the things that I reflect on through this time period is that there are some elements that are absolutely tragic, and there are some elements that I can't wait to get back, right? But there are some lessons learned with respect to things like making the time to do yoga that I'm not going to give up as the world comes back to normal. So that's a little bit on resilience, and I want to end with my thoughts on a career in consulting. And I was talking to a colleague of mine earlier today, and I was mentioning that I was having this discussion and I was having to think about, how I talk about consulting in the world today when life is different. And he had an amazing way of describing how he thinks about consulting. So I'll share that with all of you. He thinks about it as the nexus between academia and industry. And the reason why he looks at it in that way is because we have to be constantly learning. And our clients are coming to us to bring to them the best of what we see, the best of what we are hearing from academia, the best of what we see by way of industry practices, the best of what we see from one industry that can be applied to another industry. And it's really, I thought it was a great way to think about it. And what I have loved about my career in consulting is that every day is different. And so even though today I'm not traveling like I used to, every day is still different in that I'm helping clients tackle challenges, I'm helping people tackle challenges, and I feel like I am a maybe not as now as much a small business person, but I've always been able to be like an entrepreneur driving growth for our business, but through this larger organization. And I don't think any of that goes away. So I really strongly encourage people to think about careers in consulting because of how much you're able to continuously learn throughout your career. I also think travel will come back. I don't have a crystal ball to say when it will be, but I do think that what we're actually going to get is much better balance. I think that we are going to travel when we need to travel, and we will need to build relationships. We will need to be in the same room with our clients when it comes to working through challenging issues. But I think what we will be able to step away from is just traveling out of habit rather than out of necessity. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And especially as I think about the questions that I get from women as they think about their career and their family and juggling, I think it's actually going to be easier in the future than it was in the past. And so with that, I would love to answer any and all questions that you have. I didn't. Oh, we have some hands raised. So Lauren, are you going to call on people? Is that
Yeah,
the
I think that's the best way to do it. We have, okay, Maggie.
Yep, hi. I was wondering if you had a lot of international clients or like where your clients were based or if you were all over the place prior to COVID.
Yeah, so let's see, that's a fantastic question. For the beginning part of my career, I worked mostly with US based banks, but that was because of the nature of the work that I did. Now, those banks had global presence. I did end up doing some work when I was younger in Puerto Rico. It was maybe a little less fun than it sounds because it was a really hard project, but we did get to be in Puerto Rico to do it. As I advanced in my career, my client base became global in nature. And so the work that I still do individually supporting clients is primarily in the US, but I have helped support different governments around the world, ministries of finance, pharmaceutical companies, where I've helped to bring together the best of UI to serve them where they need to be served.
Thank you.
Yep.
Fiona, go ahead.
So I was wondering how beneficial you found it to have a CPA or how important it is within the world of consulting today.
Yeah, so I just happened to have my degree was in accounting, and I really loved it. And I think that accounting was a good background for what I did, what I've done, but it's not the only background. And so then because I had an accounting degree, it just made sense to sit for the CPA exam. So if you qualify for an exam like that, I highly encourage you to get the certification. That being said, I have partners who, so one of my closest partners, she's a partner in our cybersecurity business. She's a Spanish major. And then she just ended up getting into the field of cybersecurity. Advanced is now one of the top in the industry. And she feels like that language background gave her creativity and being able to translate things in a different way. Now, depending on the nature of what you do, you may or may not require, so to speak, a certification. I would encourage you, though, to investigate if there's an area that you have interest in, investigate what types of certifications are available and go ahead and try to get one because it does look good to clients, whether or not it's required. And the other thing it does is it gives you a real avenue to continue your education because most certifications require that continuing education. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Eunice, go ahead.
Well, first, I wanted to thank you for sharing so much of your industry takeaways and insights today. And kind of going along with that, I wanted to ask about, so it seems like a lot of what you do is people oriented, relationship oriented. And I was wondering, kind of generally, are there any main takeaways that you've gotten in terms of dealing with consumer brand management and, dealing with people, especially amidst all the changes that's been going on with, this pandemic? Have you had any main takeaways from whether on the B2B end or even the B2C end? Any main takeaways about dealing with
Yeah.
consumer?
Yeah. So it, interestingly, I was just interviewed for an article on close to what you asked me. So if you look up my name and Thrive recently, there you can see sort of some of those thoughts. But I think that it's really interesting. It's an interesting question, especially in this environment, because so much is based on experience, and experience oftentimes is built out of relationships. So when you think about it from a business to business relationship standpoint, whether it be consulting or other products, people still buy from people they trust. And so you need to be able to develop that trusting relationship. You need to be able to show your client, your customer, that you will deliver and that what you say is what you will provide. I think when you think through the lens of consumer, it's the same. And where our consumer products companies have had to look is how they deliver that same that same trust in their ability to respond in an environment in which they can't interact how they used to. So this is an area that's really being studied right now, and you've got behavioral economists looking at it. We've got a number of professionals who focus on either customer experience or the people and human resource side. So I don't think we have all the answers yet, but I think that this is something that is going to carry through. And just like I talked about how travel is going to change for consulting, I think that everything that we think about what has to be done in person versus what doesn't is going to change. And so companies can't look at this through the lens of, okay, well, when all this goes away, everyone's going to come back to our store, or everyone's going to come back to our movie theater, or whatever it is, right? And figure out how to get that intimacy with their customers that builds the brand loyalty.
Caroline, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could share with us a little bit about one of the most interesting or memorable projects that you've worked on over the course of your career.
Yes. Gosh, that's a good one. So one of the things that I'll tell you is that the projects that are worst when you're in the middle of them are the ones that you look back at with the most fondness. And I know I tell people that when they're in the middle of the worst projects, but they, it's harder for them to believe at that time than later. But I think I'll give a couple of examples. So as I mentioned, I worked all around the topic of consumer protection. So one of the things that I specialized in was fair lending. And so banks, there are laws in place that require that banks do not discriminate in how they lend and how they price, access to credit and all of that. And that was just really rewarding work. And so I got to work with many of the brand name banks to really look at how they were doing business. And there was, of course, not an intent to have any issues, but making sure that they had in place all the right mechanisms to make sure that they didn't have challenges from a discrimination standpoint. The other thing that was really rewarding, and that was more side of a suite of projects. The other thing that was really rewarding was out of the credit crisis, I did a lot of work with the big banks around foreclosure challenges. So you guys are probably too young to remember, maybe you've studied this, but out of the credit crisis, what happened was real estate value kept going up. And so there was never an issue really with foreclosing on mortgages, because if you had difficulty paying your mortgage, you just simply refinanced it because the value of your home was worth more than it was in the past. Then home prices went down, And all of a sudden, people were caught in mortgages that they couldn't repay. And the banks then, because there had not historically been a lot by way of foreclosures, the banks weren't prepared for this glut. And then you had a lot of challenges in the system, concerns about people losing their homes who shouldn't. Were we doing enough to help people keep their homes and all of that? So I worked with a few of the large mortgage lenders to get out from under these government orders that they were under. And there was one organization I worked with in particular where my clients were 4 women. So the head of the mortgage company, the general counsel, the CIO, and another counsel working were all women, and it was a blast. Now they were so challenging, and the work was so challenging. So just by way of context, our team members would work all day, and then one of the key clients and I would work overnight to review everything because the regulatory deadlines were so tight that we wanted to have comments back for the team when they got in the morning. So it was not a blast at that time. But 2 of the women clients are now 2 of my closest friends. And I've gone on to see the senior manager who led it is now a partner. One of the women that we brought on as a staff too, so 2 years out of college, she just got promoted to senior manager. And a lot of them attribute the success that they've had longer term to that engagement and how closely they got to work with and the opportunities they had on that client.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Jenny, go ahead.
Hey, Amy, first, thanks so much for talking to us today. And I really liked the idea you brought up about like consulting is like a bridge between academia and the industry. So this summer, I actually worked with EY for 5 weeks consulting internship, and I was really excited that we have like the opportunity that EY has lots of internal learning resources.
Yeah.
And some question I have is like when there are so many resources there to learn, how do you pick and choose to know which ones you like the best, and how do you allocate your time, because consulting is a pretty busy job, and just on your side.
So that is an excellent question. And I think that there are 2 ways to think about it. One is the beautiful thing about, EY, all the big firms that you talked about earlier, is that we do invest heavily in the development of our people. And so you've got these amazing opportunities to learn. The challenge is that it can be overwhelming and, not know where to go. So one of the things that we've done is we've developed this badges program in things that we think benefit everyone's career, right? So whether it be analytics or design thinking, cybersecurity, topics like that we know help our people advance holistically. And we've said you can earn a badge that you can display externally to show what you have learned on this key topic. And I share that because I think what it does is it helps people to focus on those things that are going to advance their career. So I think that's one thing that's important. Make sure that you're learning in a way that you're going where you want to go. The other thing is make sure that you're focused on learning what interests and excites you. So I talked about, and I'm sure this is totally nerdy, but I talked about the consumer protection stuff, and that was so interesting to me. So I just poured myself into learning about that. So think about what it is that is so interesting to you and pour yourself into that. The other thing on consulting being a busy career, one of the things that I remind myself and I remind those that work with me is that our job is never done, because there's always more you could do for the client. There's always another pursuit you could help on. There's always another learning class you could take. And so you have to learn to set boundaries for yourself, because if you don't set those boundaries, you'll never stop. And this is, your career is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so great.
That was great. Sophia, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you had any, if there was anything that you wish you had known before going into a consulting career, like either when you were in college or first starting out, that maybe you could share with people interested in going into it?
Yeah, so I'm going to be really candid. I had no idea what I was getting into. So if you look at my family, lots of people in education, which is absolutely awesome. I was and then we had small business owners. So I was the first to go into more of this business type career. I really enjoyed accounting. And then I interviewed with this amazing woman at EY at the time. And I just loved her. And, and I got offered the internship. And then when I got into it, what I really loved was the amazing people that I got to work with. I got to work with really smart people within the firm, and I got to work with amazing clients. And I think that's the piece that's really kept me, is that dynamic of working with such amazing people. And so I think if I reflect back, I think what I would encourage everyone to do is remember that the people that you work with matter a lot, right? When you go to work, you realize that you spend more of your time in a structured way than you probably do in school, right? And so those interactions are so important, and you want to make sure that you're working with people who inspire you, and you're working with people that you can learn from and also have fun with, because in this type of field, anything you go into with business can have some long hours. So it's really important to have fun.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being here tonight too.
Oh, yeah.
Caroline, go ahead.
Hi, and thank you for coming. What do you think is the most significant barrier to female leadership?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer it in a couple different ways, because one of the things that I think we don't reflect on enough are the benefits of female leadership. And I think we're actually seeing that come through loud and clear right now. If you look at the countries that have experienced COVID in a better way, like the studies show, the female leaders have done a better job in guiding their countries through on average, right? I think that a lot now around building relationships, listening, being empathetic. And I'm not saying that all women are all those things and all men aren't those things, but there are some of the traits that we tend to bring. And the reason why I say that is I think it's really important to focus on who you are more so than who you aren't. Now, that being said, I do think, it's reality that when you think of a business leader, you probably have a certain image that pops into your head. If that image probably has a deep voice and is tall, and right? And so I think probably the biggest challenge is overcoming some of those unconscious biases as to what a leader looks like, what a leader sounds like, how a leader behaves, right? Because the breadth of powerful leaders don't fit one mold.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Catherine, go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question about majors and kind of the application of what you learn academically into your career lives. I think one of the characteristics of consulting is that you get a bunch of people from a bunch of different backgrounds. Yeah. And so could you kind of speak to how much your field of study or what you studied in your academics translated, and what for you during your career was the most important skills or experiences that helped you?
Oh, absolutely. So I think that one of the most important things that you're learning is how to think and how to learn. And now there are going to be different things, and depending on your field, coming in already understanding computer programming, coming in already understanding design thinking if you're going into design, if you're going into auditing, understanding the principles of auditing, that's really helpful. But as you continue to progress in your career, it's actually more about how you learn and your thirst for learning more and connecting the dots. And so I think as we look forward, we probably are going to see some more variety. Like I was talking to someone that we're recruiting earlier today, and we were talking about how we help clients with business transformation. Well, if you're going to help a client with business transformation, you need people who understand innovation and understand design, and they probably went to art school. And then you need people who understand how operating models work and are deployed, right? Well, they probably went to business school. And what you really need is those people to work together and value what the other brings to the table and make the combination of the two worth more than what the one brings.
Thank you. That was really insightful.
Great.
Thank you. Julia, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for being here today. What is something that a first-year consultant has done on your team that has really made them stand out or go above and beyond than what you expected?
Yes, so this is a great question. To me, it's all about attitude, right? So if you're joining a firm like ours, you're smart, you got good grades, you proved you have a strong work ethic, and we brought you on, right? And so everyone you're working with is going to have that same baseline. I look for a few things. I look for, people who bring up the mood of the team. So I talked about our work is hard. What I like to remind people that we don't get hired when something's easy, because otherwise the company would do it themselves, right? And so that means it can be a stressful environment, and there can be challenges. And so people who approach their work with a positive attitude, bring up the mood of others, offer to help, show an eagerness to learn, those are the people who stand out to me.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks guys. Does anybody else have any more questions? We definitely have time for one or two more. Either use the raise your hand feature or in the chat room. Well, I have a question. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the organizations that you worked with. You said C200 and I think Girls Who Code.
Yep.
What are some of the skills that you try to, or advice that you give to younger girls? We're college students, so obviously the more technical and educational aspect is what we're thinking of, but on a broader aspect, earlier you were talking about attitude and resilience to girls in those organizations. What are some skills that you really try to bring out in them?
Yeah, so Girls Who Code, we had some amazing partnerships with them. It was awesome. We hosted some of their summer programs, and I see Catherine nodding, so maybe you participated in Girls Who Code. So I think that one of the most important things is opening your eyes to what you can do. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we like to think about, well, I learned this and I've done this before, so I can do this. And I think you have to realize that your experiences prepare you for something new. And so I'll give an example I mentioned that favorite client I worked on where it was 4 women. Well, they needed help on something, and it was big and it was competitive. And so the CEO the general counsel asked me, well, Amy, where have you done this before? And I said, well, we haven't, because there hasn't been a credit crisis like this. There hasn't been a situation where the regulators put in 11 consent orders at once. But this is what we have done, and this is why we think it's relevant, right? And that worked. But so we got the work. But think about that through your lens, right? Don't look at a challenge and say, well, I can't do that because I haven't done it before. Think about what you've learned, what you've experienced, and how you apply that to the next challenge and why your skills are relevant to it. And just don't shut down opportunities because you think you haven't done it before.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Great.
Do we have any other questions before we hand it over to Chi-Chi and our panelists? Last call. Okay, well, thank you so much, Amy, for being here and sharing. You touched upon so many different aspects, and this was great. Thank you so, so much. Virtual.
Well, thank you. I really appreciated being here, and good luck to everyone. I'm excited that you'll be in the business field in the future.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
And I'm going to hand it over to Chi-Chi, who will be moderating our panel with the panelists that we introduced previously.
All right, so good evening, everyone. I'm Chi-Chi. I'm a senior in the business school studying finance. I'm from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm an international student, and I'm an incoming business analyst at McKinsey in the Philadelphia office. I'm happy to be a part of to be moderating the panel today. Our panel discussion theme is collaboration, communication, and creativity, which I think are quintessential elements for a successful career in consulting. And with that, I'll welcome our 5 panelists. So panelists, you could go ahead and introduce yourself. We could start with Amina.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This is Amina Fawad. I'm a 2015 VSB grad, also previous Women in Business president. I see Michelle and Mary and lots of familiar faces on the call. So super excited to be here. I work at Deloitte Consulting in the technology consulting practice, specifically in supply chain. Senior consultant there, going into, or actually in my 5th year there already. So excited to talk to everybody today about my experience and hopefully share some advice, if you want to call it that, because I'm still figuring it out too, and hope to be a resource for you guys.
Awesome, thank you. Catherine Anderson.
Yeah, hi everyone. Catherine Anderson. I'm a 2012 engineering graduate. Excited to be here. I am an associate at McKinsey. Started back in February, so I'm relatively new to consulting, and excited to be here.
Awesome, thank you. Maciel.
Hello everyone, my name is Maciel Valladares. I'm from Honduras and I just graduated this last May, unfortunately class of 2020 Zoom graduation, but I'm an incoming business analyst at McKinsey in their Panama office. And I haven't started yet because of COVID, but I'm actually going to be traveling to Panama in 2 days to get started.
Awesome, thank you. Allison.
Hi guys, I'm Allison. I also just recently graduated from Villanova in 2020 from the business school. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I am working at PwC as a management consultant in the financial services sector, specifically insurance companies. And I actually just started earlier this month, so it's been about 3 weeks.
Awesome, thank you. And finally, Molly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mally Fogarty. I'm a senior consultant at EY in our data and analytics practice, which is under our technology consulting umbrella. I graduated from VSB in 2017, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all.
Awesome, thank you all. So we'll start with Catherine. So, from an 8-year-long career in the energy and power industry, and now to associate at McKinsey, you have a unique background for someone for like what the typical consultant route looks like. What's the story behind that, and how has your unique experience prepared you for your role now at McKinsey?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, you guys are making me feel old as a 2012 graduate. You guys are also young. Yeah, so I definitely have a unique background. I never really expected or planned to go into consulting. I started out my career working in Houston, which is where I still live, as a pipeline engineer working for an oil and gas company. So I had spent about the next 8 years working in oil and gas, and then decided it was time to make a change and saw a job posting on LinkedIn at McKinsey, and 6 months later I was working there. It's been such a great transition. I'm so happy and privileged to be working at McKinsey. A couple of things that Amy said that I'll echo. When I first was trying to decide what my first job would be, I had done an internship the summer before my senior year, and my boss that summer was just so supportive, saw such potential that he thought I had, and so when he offered me a job, I immediately accepted. And I think that's something that looking back, was a great decision. Something that Amy said too, right? The people you work with are the most important. And if you can find someone who believes in you and sees your potential, that's going to be, the best situation to be in. And then, I think another piece that's a little bit unique about me, I think back to my time at Villanova, and I was a good student, but not a great student. And so I'm not sure if I had applied right out of Villanova that I would have gotten a job at a consulting firm like McKinsey. So, I think there's many different paths to get there. Working in industry for 8 years ended up being great for me. I have a different, perspective than a lot of other people that I work with. And, I think it definitely worked out. So if you want to go into consulting and it doesn't work out for your first job, don't worry. Everyone's career is very long and there's going to be opportunities for you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. And I think just to kind of echo something else Amy said before she left, like everyone's career is a marathon, not a sprint. And so like there's definitely multiple routes to get to consulting. So pivoting a little bit to Maciel. So, at VSB, you had a fairly unconventional route compared to what most business students kind of got involved with, from your leadership and active involvement in Amnesty International, a global NGO focused on defending human rights, to your work with Vista. How did these experiences inform your decision to go into consulting? And additionally, what skills did you transfer from those experiences into your role that you were going to at McKinsey?
That's an awesome question. And for a little bit, I struggled to answer it myself because, like Catherine said, I never once thought about consulting as a potential career path, especially right after college. I was envisioning more going in like the UN type of route because I had an internship there prior to my internship at McKinsey. But interestingly enough, during my internship at the UN, I was reading reports done by consulting firms like EY, Bain, and McKinsey about the social and public sectors and how business can intersect to create social impact. And that's really what I'm passionate about. So it was that internship, that experience, reading those reports that kind of introduced me to the private sector as a way to create social change, which is ultimately my main goal in my career. Like Catherine said, my career is going to be really long. So McKinsey isn't my end all be all, but I definitely think it's one of the best places to start because of the amount of knowledge and talent that's there. As to the question about the skills that I transferred, to give you guys a little bit of context, Amnesty International at Villanova is an organization globally that advocates for human rights, but at Villanova specifically, it advocates for the rights of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. As an international student myself, I was really passionate about that while I was at Villanova. So I think that the human component of working and dedicating so much of my time to an organization like that really translated over to my experience at McKinsey. Even like I told you guys, I haven't even started yet, so I can speak a little bit to the interview process. I think a lot of you guys here know that the consulting process is really different, really extensive. There's many interviews and there's case interviews. So I always sought to integrate the human component into those case interviews. So to give you guys an example, if it was a case about mergers and acquisitions, I would always bring up the culture and how those two cultures would mesh between the two companies. From you take a company like Amazon, from people working at corporate to the warehouse workers. So I think that really differentiated me. And I think the learning lesson here is that if you have passions that are different than business, the way that business is so interconnected and globalized, you're always going to find an intersection there to balance those two. So you don't have to give up one to seek the other.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maciel. I think I can also definitely resonate with that. I'm a finance major in the business school, but I've never been quite part of like the typical finance societies. A lot of my interests have been like diversity and inclusion initiatives outside of the business school and within the business school. So those are things that I focused on. And I also have found intersections between business and those. So thank you so much for that. And then to Amina, from your experience as former president of a Women in Business Society to now senior consultant at Deloitte, how would you articulate the importance of female sponsorship and mentorship, laterally and vertically within consulting?
And that's a great question and definitely very relevant for this group. I think probably starting from my Villanova experience, definitely as a part of Women in Business, that was a huge part of kind of what I did in my free time at Villanova. I think I learned to kind of lean on my leaders and my peers. And I really like that you incorporated lateral mentorship and sponsorship in there too, because I think, there's so much to be said about having great mentors and leaders in your life that you can kind of look up to and ask questions. But I think it's also really important to have that peer component that where you have people to bounce ideas off of and kind of just share your experiences with someone who can really relate to you at that point in time where you are. And for me at Deloitte, that's been really, really important too, especially in a career like consulting where you don't necessarily have a traditional 9-to-5 job. You're not sitting behind a desk. Sitting at home is the first time I've sat behind a desk in literally 5 years that I've been working in consulting. So I think having female mentors and sponsors in my career has been really important, especially when it comes to having tough conversations about, how do you want to manage, your time, and how do you want to manage different responsibilities that you may choose to have in your life. And, on the other side, it's also really nice to have people to look up to have conversations, when people tell you, oh, like you're the bossy person, or you're, like you're aggressive, when those are comments that you typically never hear, being said to your male counterparts. So I think having kind of female mentors is really important for that, but that's also a really great opportunity to kind of leverage and lean on your peers. And again, women in consulting, I think out all the people that I started working with, I think we're down to maybe 2 or 3, peers that I started with that are women. And so I think really trying to develop some of those relationships is important, and cultivating those and making an effort. At least I think I go out of my way to make more of an effort to kind of cultivate those relationships, to make sure that I always have those and that I can also be there for people. So I think there's, definitely the professional aspect of it where you can have those experiences and those people to lean on to help you kind of get to the next level or work through difficult conversations and difficult topics. But I think it's also really, important to have those for kind of just those personal moments where you might just need, a friendly person to bounce an idea off of that can kind of relate to what you're going through. So, I think male sponsors and mentors are also really great. And I've had great male mentors and sponsors both at Villanova and in my career at Deloitte. But I think there definitely is something to be said to find, another fellow woman who can kind of back you up and is going through some of the same things that you are in various parts of your career. So if you have, good friends, definitely hang on to them. And definitely don't be afraid to leverage all the relationships that you built at Villanova, no matter where you go in your career. I know that there's people at Villanova that I still talk to regularly to tell them what's going on in my life and get their ideas and opinions on things. So, the relationships that you build here are definitely relationships that you can have throughout your professional career. So definitely, recommend keeping those as well.
Thank you so much for that, Amina. I, again, fully resonate. So I have 3 sisters also who are all in business. So I think they've become my circle of female, I guess, mentors and sponsors, but like we're all like within the same age range. And I think they've been instrumental in my own like career at Villanova, deciding like what majors and internships and things like that. So definitely fully agree with that. And then pivoting a little bit to Allison, success in consulting really is dependent, I mean, amongst other things, on our ability to consistently lean into discomfort. From originally being a biology major and then transferring to BSB and now working as a management consultant in the financial services industry within insurance at PwC. Could you speak a little bit to the importance of communication when navigating a new space?
Yeah, so I thought this was a really good question based on what we talked about. But I think the big thing of what was spoken earlier is you're constantly learning. You're never going to have all the information or maybe have all the background that you need when you go into something such as an engagement. But like going back to when I was a bio major, when I made the decision to transfer into the business school, I kind of felt like I was behind my peers in the fact that kind of navigating networking, navigating career affairs, like I didn't really know, are you supposed to go if you haven't really had a background? Like what's kind of the steps that you take? So I think kind of based on what was said previously with mentorship, find someone that you can connect with, kind of be honest at the beginning. What are your hesitations? Like, what are you going in with? So for me, for bio, before I even transferred into the business school, I kind of spoke to teachers that I was thinking of taking. For example, I took my first econ class when I was still a bio major. I took a political science class, and I told the teachers going in that I was looking to maybe kind of change my major and see. So they were kind of afterwards reaching out to me. I would kind of reach back out to them to kind of get their feedback. And so that kind of going into the big communication thing is feedback. You're going to get feedback all the time, and it's important to tell the people that you talk to what kind of feedback you appreciate. So for example, I've been in my role now for about 3 weeks, and I think like everyone, I didn't think I was going to be in consulting. It was something I decided kind of last minute to apply for, that I decided was kind of the path for me. And so there are a lot of people that I'm working with now that were interns before I started, so they have a little bit background too. And so I think it's just getting feedback. I had my first, it was a case simulation, but I got feedback very quickly. I made connections with other people to talk to, like, oh, maybe you don't understand how the slides template works. Like, let me show you kind of what I've done for certain cases like that. So just making those connections, being open and honest, and getting the feedback and really valuing the feedback, not kind of taking it to heart.
No, 100%. Thank you so much for that, Allison. And again, leveraging some of my experiences. So again, I mentioned I'm an international student. So when I came to Villanova, did not know a single person on the entire campus or even around the area. And it was very like unnerving and uncomfortable. But again, to Allison's point about, communicating with your professors and like your peers about, what you're going through and the struggles you're going through. And people were always willing, especially at Villanova, to, help you figure it out, give you feedback on things you could do better, to, better set yourself apart and be successful. So moving on to the next question to Mali. A lot of female consultants often struggle with navigating heavily male-dominated spaces because consulting is just a lot more male-dominated. And one of the largest struggles is a lack of representation in senior management. And in thinking about your experience working within data analytics, with the data analytics group at EY, what are some practical ways you've gone about overcoming some of the imposter syndrome that sometimes comes with working within such a space?
Yeah. When I saw this question, I kind of was thinking, this is something that I've definitely thought about and struggled with at EY. I am in a very technical practice. I'm working with very smart people that are computer science majors. They were computer science majors. They were engineers. They are master coders. People that I like look up to so much. I'm like, you are so smart. And sometimes I think back and I'm like, oh, I don't have the skill set to be in this technical space. And I spent a lot of my, first couple of maybe year or two in my career kind of having that mentality of, oh, I'm not sure if I belong kind of thing. And the best thing I think that ever happened to me was that I started working with one of my greatest mentors now. And like we said, female mentorship is very important, but she gave me the advice that, it's, if you don't know something, you can learn it. You don't have to tell yourself that you can't learn it. And kind of building that confidence in myself and knowing what my strengths are. So maybe I can't code. Maybe that's just not that I can't code, but maybe I could learn. But if I don't want to learn, maybe I know the business side really well, and I know what my strengths are and why I'm in the room to begin with. And that was a really kind of eye-opening thing for me to start thinking. And it also, I think, translates really well to consulting in general, because this is a career where you always are learning something new. You're always at a place where you're being pushed, your boundaries are being pushed for what you can learn and do. And so if you can build your confidence in yourself and in your strengths, then that can, pay dividends for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So now we're going to move into another set of questions. Again, this is the floor is open for all the panelists to kind of hop in response to each of the following questions. So in preparing for this, I came across actually one of Amy Bracio's articles, our keynote for today, where she and a colleague discussed where employee centricity meets the future of work. And the biggest takeaway for me from the article is that, purpose, culture, and leadership create the trust that companies need to accelerate performance. So in thinking about this, especially within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and now how affected people's work in different ways, in what innovative ways did your respective firms support you during this period?
I can start with that one. My start date was actually pushed like 5 months, so it was definitely a situation that no one was foreseen. I don't think that in this case, the Panama office of McKinsey particularly did anything innovative. They just really assured me that my job was there and that they would help me along every step of the way. And even though like that's not, like I said, innovative, I think it speaks a lot to how they value their employees. And that really meant a lot to me when COVID was kicking off in March. They called me twice just to tell me that no matter what happened, that I would have my job and that they would help me. And they did that consistently every month. So there wasn't one period of time where I was wondering what I was going to do. And there is a big privilege in that, as we know that COVID pandemic has affected a lot of people. So I do recognize that privilege. And I think that it's very important when looking for employers to feel that they value you and to not feel like you're just another person in the company. So that was most important for me.
Thank you for that, Maciel.
Yeah, I can add on to that a little bit. I think, when I joined McKinsey back in February, I was part of the first ever virtual orientation. So that was interesting. It was innovative because, a whole group of people had to quickly take a event that was in person that they had a really good format for. And instead of just canceling it and saying, we're not going to do orientation anymore, they found a way to make it work over Zoom, right? And so that was really impactful. A couple other things that McKinsey did that, I didn't actually need to take advantage of, luckily, was, offering people, who had kids at home and weren't able to commit to working full time anymore, they could take a step back and be part-time for a while. Either parents, right? If you had kids and they couldn't have care, you could say, yep, I'm going to take a step back and go to part-time. So I think, allowing that flexibility, hopefully will keep people in the workforce and keep people at McKinsey, going through this when people's lives have been uprooted.
And I can kind of second what Catherine and both Maciel said with some of their points. So my start date was also pushed back, although I just started. And I think what was important, which Maciel kind of said, is the transparency that my company had. I got regular emails, even though I wasn't a full-time employee, kind of like what their next steps were. If they had like a meeting, they kind of sent out like quick bullet points to all the new hires. And they did say that they decided that the partners would take a cut before any new hires lost their job. So knowing that before I even started, that my company was taking care of me meant a lot. And then I actually just finished my virtual training. And so what I thought was, I would say was innovative, was one, that we could have the training, because there were about 400 people that onboarded with me. And I thought what was even better is like part of our training, which they definitely had to update, was kind of like how to work remotely on Zoom, how to be remote with your clients, and certain like quick fixes, or like maybe like, especially like for me, body language is very key and I think is important when you're talking to clients. So they kind of said like kind of solutions for that. So I think that I've been lucky that it's been about 6 months that they've had time to prepare, but they really want the new hires to be set up for success too, working remotely.
And I'll just chime in a little bit on kind of what I think EY has done and really encouraged a lot of, I think, just innovative ways to kind of to make human connection with your teams, like in just day to day, because we lost those coffee runs and those team rooms for the time being. So it's kind of gotten really important to check in with people regularly. So one thing that I'm on a pretty large project right now, and I onboarded in May. So I onboarded onto this project remotely. And we've kind of done like a rotating spotlight of every person on the team, and where we introduce, ourselves and kind of just talk about the bigger picture of the project, and kind of make those more organic conversations happen more regularly. So it's not just you're in a meeting, you talk about work, and that's the end of it, and you lose those connections, which is, half the job. Is we want to like the people you work with, and that's why we're here. So
awesome, thank you all for that. Amina, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
It's all pretty much the same. I don't want to, belabor the point, but I think transparency was really important. I think someone said that. Our consulting CEO did a weekly call with us every week, which I thought was really cool. And I think everyone was kind of going through the, like, I don't really know what to do stage for a while. And it was kind of like, let's just get on the phone. And basically people could submit questions earlier and they would tell us, okay, here's the state of the practice. Like, here's what's going on. So it was really cool. It kind of like humanized it for everybody too. And you kind of got to see like, okay, well, Dan, the CEO, is also just a normal person going through the same exact things that we're going through with his family and all of that. And now it's kind of transitioned into like a monthly call that he now does to talk about, like, how are things going to change in a post-COVID world? Like, what are we going to change about how we do business or travel or things like that? So I think that's been like a nice consistent thing that we all get to connect about too. We'll be on the, be talking to our teams, be like, oh, did you hear what Dan said? Like, that was very cool. So I think every company is kind of figuring it out on their own, and every company has a different culture and like way of approaching things. But I, try to give everybody grace during this time, because everyone's just, doing their best to do what they can for their employees. So.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all for that. So next question is kind of about, in your respective careers, experiences in college, what are you most proud of, and what lessons do you take away from that experience? Anyone can start with this one.
I can start with that one. One of the things that I'm definitely most proud of is just, I think, like human connection and like bringing people together. That's something that I was like really passionate about doing at Villanova, and I knew I wanted to continue doing that in my career. And it's one of the reasons I picked Deloitte as the place that I wanted to work, because the consulting practice is very, like, it's again, like very people oriented, just consulting is, but they do put a lot of, they put a lot of focus on community building, which obviously is something very important to us at Villanova as well. So for me, that's always been kind of a goal of mine, is that it's not just kind of like about the work. Like, obviously that's our responsibility. We're held accountable for that, but it really is about building connections and building teams and building friendships. And I think that's something that I'm proud of, that I've gotten to do at Villanova, and I've seen it come to life at Deloitte as well. Like, I've seen people that have been on my team and are like now friends. I've had experiences where I've been on a team with someone and now, we're friends. Like, I've been in people's weddings. So I think that's something that I knew was really important to me, that of course, like, the work has to get done, but for me to, enjoy it somewhat, that's something that I wanted to work on. And so kind of being able to do that and see it come to life both for myself and for others is definitely something that I'm really proud of.
Yeah, I can follow that. I think rather than like a single event or a project, the thing I'm most proud of in my very limited career I haven't begun yet is carving my own path and sticking to my values and my passions. I think that once you get to an amazing place like VSB, it's very easy to let yourself go with what everyone is doing. And I mean, I think we can all relate here, if we've been at Villanova, to the typical Villanova way of being in college, where you join these clubs and you do these things. And I'm not taking away the legitimacy of that. If you're truly passionate about that, that's awesome. But it can be a little difficult to carve your own path, to do things that you are really passionate about that no one else is talking about. So I think that's what I'm most proud of. I didn't think it would lead me to McKinsey, like I said before, but I'm happy to be there because I know that what I did it because I truly cared about it.
Allison, Nally, and Catherine, do you have anything?
I can speak. So I would say, since I just started, that I would say interviewing for my consulting roles is something that I'm most proud of so far. And kind of like leaning into while I'm starting is just like not letting the fear of failure like stop you from doing things. So when I found that this was something that I wanted to do, you know, I heard from people like how competitive the consulting industry, especially when you're being an entry level hire and really haven't had a corporate job before then, and just how grueling the process is to maybe get to the end and, you know, not get the result you wanted to. But I think for me, I would have rather failed knowing that I tried because it was something I was passionate about than maybe choosing something based on my path beforehand that would have been easier. And so I think it was even better because since it was such a long process, getting towards the end and knowing that you really connected with the people you interviewed with and you really like did your best and did it authentically to like how you problem solve and kind of like how you would go about it in a real world setting, just kind of made it all the more worthwhile that I'm doing something that I love and that I didn't let how difficult it might have been kind of stop me from doing that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really going way back to the very first decision I made in my career. And that was deciding to pick up and move to Texas and work in the oil and gas industry. You know, I think it sometimes can be hard when, you know, when I graduated and I was going to get a job, most of my friends were going to New York or staying in Philly or going to DC. And it was hard to make the decision, right, to move to a city all by myself where I didn't know anyone. But I think in the long run, that ended up being the best decision I ever made because it, you know, taught me that I could go out on my own and be successful and go into a completely male-dominated industry and survive. And so I'm definitely proud of that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I also I'm pretty proud of in my career. I'm still pretty early in it. It's just the community of people that I've built around myself. EY is a big company and it's easy to kind of get lost. I think I hopefully, you know, I think they do a lot so that doesn't happen, but it can be easy to kind of lose sight of what it is that you want to do. And it's hard when you don't have more like a lot of structure, like you do your whole life growing up, having a ton of structure and people telling you what to do. So I'm proud of the people that I've had around me and the mentors that I've found. And I've found that really kind of helped me both professionally and finding projects that I like and finding positions where I could be more challenged to the next level. And then also personally where people that have been there before can kind of guide me a little bit. So I'm definitely proud of that.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing those wonderful, wonderful stories about, you know, what have been the most, I guess, the most exciting and proudest moments in your careers and, you know, your college experiences so far. And then, you know, next question, I think this speaks, Catherine and Molly probably will be, and Amina will probably be best to respond to this question, seeing as they're a bit farther along in their careers. But, you know, what's been the most exciting and impactful project you've worked on within consulting so far?
I can talk about, I would say, my favorite project and longest project I've ever been on. But probably a year into joining Deloitte, year and a half into joining Deloitte, I was working on a proposal selling a project for a company that made blinds and window shades called Hunter Douglas. If anybody watches HGTV, I'm sure you've seen commercials for them. And it was a very random, like got pulled into a partner's office to be like, oh, I need help with this. One of the very few times I like ever actually went to the office in the Philly office in the city. Ended up being staffed on that project for 3.5 years and was pretty much like the first person on the ground with the 2 other senior managers and a partner, and ended up leaving as one of the last people on the project as well. Got promoted twice on that project and also got to like actually see kind of all of my work come to life several times. Got to switch different roles on the project, different teams, And, in the beginning, I was like, oh, I really don't want to be here for 3.5 years. Like, that seems like a really long time to be working on a project. But I think kind of looking back on it, I, realized how much impact that you do have, seeing, an entire business. You ever buy Hunter Douglas shades, or your parents buy Hunter Douglas shades, you can know that I touched those in some way, shape, or form. So kind of seeing that actually come to life, and specifically working in supply chain, like it's very real, very tangible. I think that was really cool, and developed really great relationships, not only within the Deloitte team, but also with the client, like people that I still talk to almost a year and a half after it's been over now, like people that I've, had made plans to see, obviously not happening because of COVID. So I think kind of being able to go through that whole project and, physically seeing impact that I made, but also kind of feeling that in different ways through relationships and all of that, definitely like the most exciting thing I've done. So kind of doing another one of those right now, and we actually have our like first system deployment next Monday, so we'll see how that goes. But I think kind of doing it for the very first time was a really cool experience for me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Catherine or Mally?
Sure. Yeah. So, my favorite project that I worked on was also my longest project. And it's funny, I think Amy said the same thing, that you kind of during the time, it kind of seems like it's really long and you're like, why am I still on this? And then after, in like hindsight, you're like, wow, that was awesome. And so the project that I was on, it was huge. It was probably one of the biggest projects EY has ever done. It was 1,200 people. We were working for a really large bank across multiple countries and sites across the country. And so I was part of kind of an internal team that was doing a lot of the, project management and the reporting, and which day to day, I was like, oh, this is, it's cool, but I wanted to do like the really exciting consulting stuff. But our team was very smart and very innovative, and we realized, that we have 1,200 people, and that's a ton of data that we're getting from all the work that they're doing. And so we turned that data into analytics for the bank. And so we were able to kind of inform their process and find ways to fix the things that they needed to be fixed, that they didn't expect us to do. They didn't, it wasn't written in our statement of work that we had to do this. It was just something that our team was like, hey, we have all of this data. We can do a lot of work for this company. And it was really impactful for the bank, and they were really happy with what we had done. And it was also just very cool to work with people in different countries and in different sites, and travel to all of these places was definitely awesome. So that was one of my favorite projects for sure.
And I think, Mally, you bring up a really good point. Like in the day-to-day, you're kind of like, this is fine. Like, it's not great. It's not bad. I'm just doing it. And I think maybe that's just kind of advice, or like a testament for everyone to like listen to. It's sometimes like in the moment, things don't feel like as impactful, or like you're like, am I really contributing anything? But when you take a step back, even if it's after a couple of months, and you kind of see like the progress that you've made or that your team has made, it definitely like it makes a huge difference. And I think the cool thing about consulting is that a lot of times you are moving at a fast pace. So a couple months down the road, like looks totally different than what it did when you started. So you can actually see tangible differences. So I think the thing with consulting is it's always like the retrospective is much different than the day-to-day, especially in kind of living in that project world. So if you're interested in consulting, keep that in mind. But I think it goes for like any job and life, all of that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then to move to our final question of today. So what's the best career advice you've ever received? And if you could go back to your, sophomore self in college, what would you say to her?
I can go really quick. I think honestly, like somewhat recently, somebody just told me like not to second guess myself, and that if I was a man, I wouldn't even like ask myself that question. So that's something I'm really embracing, that I think, my personal biggest hurdle is just myself. And I always feel like other people tell me that like, oh, you have the skills, like you're confident, you have X, Y, Z, but it's hard for me to sometimes embrace that. And so I think the best advice I've gotten is just, not to second guess myself. And if you feel like it's right, go for it. And I think I definitely have done that in bits and pieces throughout my career, even taking this job in consulting to begin with as a Villanova student. But I think, go with your gut. It's usually almost always right. And if not, you'll figure it out and you'll course correct. But I think it's so important to just, have that self-confidence no matter what, because there's a lot of people out there that don't even think twice about it. And, you shouldn't either. So it's my quick advice that I received somewhat recently, and definitely would like to tell myself that a few years ago. And I'm sure I will continue telling myself that as I go on in my career.
I can follow that since I was going to say something similar. I definitely have been too involved with like my thoughts, second guessing myself. And there is a gendered notion of that. There is a component of women being told to do that because we feel that we're not enough to be, especially in a male dominated space like consulting, especially at a firm like McKinsey, where there is so much emphasis placed on the talent and the recruiting process. You constantly feel imposter syndrome. And I know that we touched on this before, but not second guessing yourself and getting out of your own head is so important to combating that imposter syndrome. Because when I talked to my colleagues there, well, my future colleagues there, they all told me that they all felt the same thing. So if we all feel the same thing, then that means that that's just a product of, the firm, not our specific capabilities. And just to add to that, kind of more like a general piece of advice, there was this speaker in January, I don't know if you guys had the opportunity to see her, called Valerie Kerr. She was the MLK keynote speaker at Villanova. And I had the opportunity to talk with her. And I was telling her how I wasn't sure about getting into consulting because, it didn't directly address what I wanted to do. And I was second guessing myself basically. And she told me to, this might sound a little cliche, but she told me to look at my life as a song, and there's going to be high notes and low notes, but like don't get too stuck in the low notes. And I've definitely had a bunch of low notes, and I'm only 22. So I think that really went a long way. I constantly remember that, there's always going to be something next.
Yeah, and I can go next. So I would say to start with, what I would tell myself is, just because I had a little bit of not a normal path, especially going to VSB, is kind of just trusting your gut and what you like value out of the work you do. So I started off as a bio major, kind of didn't like that there wasn't a lot of like team utilization, kind of like all on your own. So I moved to the business school. I ended up choosing econ because I kind of liked that there was a lot of detail, but like looking at the holistic kind of like understanding of it, I really was interested in that. I ended up actually interning for utility my junior year. And I found out on some of the meetings that I did, which was more like advisory based on only on Thursdays, but those were like, I realized that Thursday was my favorite day. And that's when I was like, you know what, I think consulting is something that I would be interested in. So I would just say, don't be afraid if your path isn't what you want it to be. I mean, 4 years ago, I thought I was going to be an orthodontist, and I'm clearly not. So things change. And I think if you just know what you're passionate about and like what makes you enjoy things, then it'll just be fine. I talked to someone a week ago who ended up graduating and went to med school and dropped out of med school and is now doing insurance consulting with me. So it's never too late to change what you want to do. And then I would say the best advice I got from someone else would be just being able to get back up. I think especially with consulting, you're going to have hard days where maybe your team expects more from you, or maybe your client doesn't have the best feedback to give you, and maybe it's a new client and they're not maybe approaching you in the best way. But not taking things personally in consulting is extremely key, and you just have to keep getting back up and learning to give your opinion and work hard, and not let the fear of maybe getting your ego bruised a little bit stop you from continuing on that path.
I can share just my the best advice that I've received is just to be your own best advocate. Like your career is your own, and as much as you can have this whole group of people behind you, but at the end of the day, like what you want from your life and your career, it's in your hands, and that goes for what company you work for and what you decide to do. And I'm echoing, what Allison said is, it's you have everything you can to build your career. You have to be your own advocate, and what you thought that you were might have been doing could change, but yeah, trust your gut, and that's the best advice that I can give.
And Catherine?
Yeah, I think something that I've relearned several times in my my career is it's really hard to know when you're in a situation if you have perspective or not. I think that that's something I've learned over and over again is I've been in a situation and then later I've looked back and realized that I really didn't have a good perspective on what was going on. And so someone at the very beginning of my career told me, when you're in a situation and you don't know what to do, reach out to someone, right? Reach out to a mentor, reach out to someone who's been where you are and ask them for their perspective on the situation because they can help you, think about it in a way that you may not be able to. And so that's the advice I would, go back to tell myself and tell you all is, everyone, at my stage in the career and everyone ahead of me, right, we've all had help. We've all had people who've taken time out of their day to answer the stupid questions that we've had and help us talk through the career advice and the career moves. And so don't be afraid to reach out, send someone a note on LinkedIn, right? Get someone's email and send them a note. If they don't have time, they'll let you know, but most people are definitely going to be willing to help you out.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that. And I think I'll just also share one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten earlier this year from one of my mentors. He kind of said that if you're not failing, then you're not dreaming big enough because you are going to make mistakes and you are going to fill out some things. And that's just like how things work. And in those times, you learn from those and kind of keep going. And, in successes and failures, he says like there's an overlap in both things because there's a lesson to learn to, how do I keep being successful? And in the failures, what did I do wrong? And how do I learn from those? So everything is just it's a learning opportunity to keep, succeeding at what you're doing. And if sometimes you don't do as well as you thought, which those times will come much more than you do as well as you thought, like it's important to just take the lesson from that and keep on. Because at the end of the day, like everyone's kind of echoed throughout our discussion, your career is a marathon. Like sometimes you're going to be running a little slower and then sometimes you're going to be running a little faster. But what's most important is that you are still running. You are still moving. But no, we've come to the end of our panel. Thank you so much for our panelists. And at this point, Lauren, I believe we're opening up for Q&A if we have any questions in the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of our panelists and Chi-Chi. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you guys so much for sharing. We definitely have time for a few questions. It's going to be a little bit limited because we're coming towards the end. But before we do take those or wrap things up, I just want to say that members and everyone be on the lookout for a handout coming from Women in Business that has everyone that you heard from today's contact information. I know this year we got a limited or cut short of our networking section. So we want to make sure that you guys can still reach out and network and connect with everyone that you heard from tonight. But we definitely do have time for one or two questions. So does anybody have anything they would like to ask? Okay, well, be on the lookout for that handout and you can individually reach out and ask any questions that you have. But before we wrap things up, I just want to once again say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Michelle Galloway, Dr. Kelly, our sponsor, EY, seeing all the EY campus recruiters, Lisette Snediger, Ryan Oswald, all of the EY campus ambassadors. It was great seeing you all here. All of our panelists, thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys sharing today. Chi-Chi, thank you, and our co-sponsor, Villanova Consulting Group. It was really great, and our first virtual POW definitely looked different, but thank you guys so much for making it a really successful event.